He then continues and he says, وَمَعْلُومٌ أَنَّ الْمَحْبُوبَاتِ لَا تُنَالُ غَالِبًا إِلَّا بِاحْتِمَالِ الْمَكْرُوحَاتِ. This is a point that I mentioned earlier about sacrifice. Ibn Taymiyyah says, it is known that beloved things are not acquired, generally speaking, overwhelmingly, except by having to bear things that you don't like. Right? So here, this is a general principle. In fact, it even applies to everybody. It applies to the non-Muslim, applies to everybody. Right? This is a general principle, that things that you love can only be acquired by bearing hardships, by bearing things that you dislike, by bearing, things that you dislike. And Shaykh al-Fawzan comments upon this and he says, that which is beloved to you from the things that you like doesn't come just like that. You have to bear some hardship, and this applies to all things, but the greatest of those things is paradise. Right? So we can speak about the world. We know the world, you want to make money, you have to make some effort, you have to go through some hardships. You want to earn a living or get a job, you have to go through some hardships. Right? So this applies to everything, and it applies universally to everybody. But the greatest thing that a person can seek is paradise. And so does it make any sense that all of these worldly things, we know that you have to make sacrifices, that you have to bear hardships, and then when it comes to the greatest thing, which is paradise, you think you're just going to walk in and wake up and just slip and fall into paradise? No. Obviously there's going to be makruhat, there's going to be things that you dislike. And so Shaykh al-Fawzan says here, فَالْجَنَّةُ مَحْبُوبَةٌ, paradise is beloved, but it's not acquired except by بتحمل المشاق والعمل الصالح والجهاد في سبيل الله والإنفاق والأعمال الصالحة. It's not acquired except by difficulty, hardship, righteous deeds, striving in the path of Allah, spending, doing righteous deeds. Right? So فالمحبوب لا ينال إلا بتحمل المكاره. The beloved thing is not acquired except by bearing hardships and difficulties. And that's why we come to the hadith of the Messenger of Allah ﷺ, where he said, حُفَّتِ الْجَنَّةِ بِالْمَكَارِحِ وَحُفَّتِ النَّارِ بِالشَّهَوَاتِ. Paradise is surrounded by all the disliked, hated things. It's surrounded by all the disliked, things. And hellfire is surrounded by all of the desires. It's surrounded, right? So this shows like the attraction. A person is naturally attracted to the shahawat. It's very easy. There's no barriers. There's no hardships. You just, But as for the paradise here, surrounded by the hard, the things of hardship, a person is naturally averse to hardship. He wants to keep away from hardship. And so all of this together, when we put all of this together, it shows, like when we connect all of this speech together, essentially what's being said is that sacrifice and effort is a measure of the love in the heart. Right? And the love in the heart itself is a foundation of muwalat, which is loyalty to Allah Azza wa Jal. Right? And from that follows everything else. So therefore it is a must that you face hardships, that you face difficulties, that you face obstacles, that you are, thrown back and you've got to stand up again and move forward again. This is the reality of, if you're pursuing Jannah, this is the reality of what this world is about to the believer. Right? So as we shall see, this shows that the believer has to be resilient and strong. And maybe in the next lesson, but later on, this point will be made that the believer is basically strong, as opposed to the disbeliever, because the believer is pursuing paradise, and these material things don't really mean anything to him, because you don't get satisfaction from the material things, even if you had them all. If you had everything, right, homes, cars, women, wealth, children, offspring, whatever, you wouldn't find tum'anina, you wouldn't find satisfaction, sukoon, you wouldn't find fulfillment in these things, because they all perish. You just want more and more and more and more. So the believer, following all of this to its natural conclusion, the believer knows that the life is a struggle, and paradise cannot be achieved except with a struggle, except by facing hardships. When you wake up in the morning, expect to face hardship. When you get out of the bed, you should know that today is going to be a day of hardships, right? This is how you go out and you face life on a day-to-day basis. So because of this, the believer is strong and resilient, and later on, Ibn Taymiyyah will speak about, and Shaykh Fawzan as well, will speak about some of the tools that the believer has, which is at-tawakkul and isti'ana and the ibadah. We use all of these things to counter these hardships, but he contrasts between the believer and the disbeliever, because the one who is not a believer, you will find, as Shaykh al-Fawzan says, فَتَجِدُ الْكُفَّارُ وَإِنْ كَانُوا أُعْطُوا مِنَ الدُّنْيَا وزحرتها إلا أنهم في هم وفي قلق وفي خوف لا يرتاحون ولا يتلذذون بما في أيديهم من متاع الدنيا. We find that they even if they are given everything from the world, and its glitter and its the flowers and everything else, they're always in anxiety, anxious, stressed, and they are disturbed and fear, and they're not able to truly taste the pleasure of the things that they've been given, right? Because they don't really have any true satisfaction, because that comes in the dhikr of Allah Azza wa Jal, and in striving to please Him. So because of that, examples of this. We can clearly see this from our own experience, that first of all, we know generally that suicides and people who kill themselves, it's greatest among the people of atheism. In mostly atheistic countries, you find, for example, in the Scandinavian countries, like Sweden, Norway, these kind of areas, where they are very secular, lots of atheism generally, and just the rest of the world in general. China, for example, whatever, Japan, for example, that's where the suicides are the greatest, right? Because they can't handle life. There's nothing after life. There's nothing to strive for, right? And what happens is, one day these people wake up and it really hits them to think, wait a minute, there's nothing after this, and my life is just there's no meaning in my life. What on earth am I doing? Waking up every morning, going through all of this toil and struggle and effort and all the stresses of life, with financial difficulties and problems with the wife and problems with the children. So what on earth am I doing? What's the purpose behind it? No, nothing, right? The realization hits them that there's absolutely no meaning to your life. It's all fake, and it's even if you try to invent a meaning for your life, you are only deceiving yourself, because it's not real. Do you understand? This is the problem with atheists, because they say that there's no purpose behind life, there's no afterlife, there's no goal, there's no wisdom. Because there isn't one, right? Then that means that every person, every one of us, when we wake up in the morning, or when we stop and think, we have to invent a meaning to our lives, right? We have to invent one, and then we have to live our life based upon the thing that we invented, right? So this can only go on so long, till one day you realize, hold on a minute, the Big Bang came, there's everything's random, and there's no purpose, no wisdom, and it's all just materialism, and basically there's nothing after life, and I've just got a miserable life, and I'm just trying to invent a purpose for me to continue living my life, but that purpose is pure invention. It's not actually true. So some people, it actually hits them that, this is what the reality is. Like the atheists, this is what they have to face. And then that's why you find amongst the atheists, the suicide is the highest, right? Because they truly, some of them who think properly, they realize, you know what, my life is absolutely meaningless, right? It's as meaningless as some dirt, on the ground that the dog leaves behind. It's as meaningless as that, right? So, and then they obviously tips them over and they commit suicide, right? And likewise, you see amongst these people that, to such an extreme that, someone, their dog died and the whole life collapses. And they can't live life, because the poor cat or the dog, the pets that they've been living with for the past 10, 15 years, and it's kept them company, and now it's died, and basically life's not worth living anymore. So people commit suicide because of a dog or a cat, right? So, closing this discussion for today, where we are leading to then in this train of thought, you have to follow all of these points. That follow. There's a connection between all these things. So the point being, we spoke about being captivated and enslaved by other than Allah. This was many lessons ago, and there's many things that captivate you, worldly, material things, relationships, things like that. And the way to escape that is through traits and qualities that we discussed in those verses and in the hadith, and by understanding what is the reality of mahabba. What is mahabba? It is muwalat, right? What is al-jihad? What is striving in Allah's path? Right? When you understand the definition of these basic things, then you realize that, the fact that you love the things that Allah loves messengers, the prophets, the angels, the books, paradise for His believers. Right? When you love those things, then you want to seek those things. And when you seek those things, you're going to encounter al-makruhat, struggles. You're going to have trials, you're going to have struggles, you're going to, every day is going to be like a struggle to you. But you have to get through that, you have to get over that. And a sign of your true love and sincerity is the degree of sacrifice, is the degree that you are willing to bear the hardships and the harms to get what you want. And so herein lies the big difference between the believer, because the believer has been given in the Quran and the Sunnah tools and means to help him, right? Which is al-isti'ana, al-tawakkul, al-ibadah. These are things that Allah has given us that we use to continue, right, on the path. And so this leads to a believer being strong and resilient. And obviously we know the most resilient are the prophets and the messengers. We read their stories and biographies and we can see that clearly. But this is how a believer is. And so that contrasts with the people who lack iman and the people of kufr and shirk. And we see clearly in them, in their behaviors and in what they do, that they are basically lost. And they have nothing to live for. And they are very weak. They can't handle the trials of life. They can't handle the trials of life, right? So we'll stop on that note, inshallah.